Okay, so we have a guest today here who's actually been working for LinkedIn, for TripAdvisor, for Cisco, for big companies. He also has wrote his own book about startups. And currently, he's working on he's a founder of his own startup, Atomic Squirrel. So, and today he's here to give you a crash course of design for developers. So, let's welcome Jim.
Hey folks, can you all hear me okay? Cool, thank you for having me. This talk is a crash course on design for developers, or really for anyone who isn't already a professional designer. If you are a professional designer, please contain your laughter until the end. So, what I'll be talking about today. I'll talk about why everyone should learn design. I'll then touch on two core design topics, which are user-centered design and visual design. And then I'll do a quick recap at the end. So the first question is, why learn design? So here's a question for you. What is Google? What is it as a product? Google has hundreds and thousands of data centers, servers in data centers all over the world, but to most people, that's not Google. They have billions of lines of code, but that's not Google. They have amazing algorithms that they've developed, but most people don't know the first thing about that. Now, to most people, that's Google. This user interface, this front end, is Google, which is similar to the way an iceberg works. Most of you probably know that with an iceberg, the part you can see, the part that's above the surface, is only about 10% of the iceberg. The other 90%, it's under the water. With a company like Google, probably 90% of their work is the data centers, the code, the algorithms, but users don't see it. Users see just the 10% that's above the surface. Joe Spolsky called this the Iceberg Secret. The reason it's a secret is that most of us, probably all of us, judge products, judge entire companies based on 10% of their work. In other words, the design is the product. There's no distinction. It's not just some veneer you add at the end. It is the product, even if it's only 10% of the effort. And in some companies, it's a lot more than 10%. Steve Jobs said that design is not what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. So keep that in mind. Design is the product. It's what you're doing. If you're building startups, you have no choice but to be good at design. Or, well, you do have a choice. You can also fail. I'm Evgeny Brikman. I also go by the nickname Jim. I'm not a designer. As I said, please save your laughter till the end. But I use design all the time. And so do all of you. Not just for building products, not just for building startups, but for a lot of things in life. You probably all have resumes. Those require design. You might have a web page. More design. You might have a house that you have to decorate. More design. This is not my house. I wish it was. If you build any kind of systems, if you build any kind of software, that involves a lot of design. And if you have to give talks like this one, more design. So we use design all the time, and the goal of this talk is to give you just some really basic design tools. I only got about 20 minutes, so think of this as just like a Hello World tutorial. It's really the most introductory material. And I'll give you a list of tools and techniques that hopefully you'll find useful, and then it's up to you to go and seek more info about them. One place you can get more info is in my book, which is called Hello Startup. And it's kind of my guide to building products and technologies and teams, and it goes into quite a bit more depth. And the other place is my company, Atomic Squirrel. That's my awesome logo. And the goal of my company is I help people launch startups. I help people build their products, their technologies, and their teams. So let's talk about user-centered design. A lot to cover, so I apologize. I'm going to go quickly. The slide deck I posted in the Facebook page. It's on my homepage, ybrikman.com. It's on SlideShare. Should be easy to find, so don't worry about memorizing this stuff. So user-centered design. Now, when most people think of design, they think of colors, they think of buttons, they think of visual things, but that's not really what design is about. Design is about people. It's about helping people achieve goals. And if you start by jumping into buttons and colors and all of that stuff before you figure out who is using your software and why, you're not going to be successful at design. So these are a few tools and techniques you can use to make sure you know who is using your products and why. First one, personas. So here's a fun piece of advice. Oops. Never design for the average person. Never design products for the average person. There's no such thing. This like weird circular blob thing doesn't exist. There is no average person. Or to put it more colorfully, the average person has one testicle and one fallopian tube. Think about it. Think about it. If you're designing for the average person, you're designing for absolutely nobody. So a better approach is to use personas. A persona is a fictional but very specific person. So what you do is you go out, you do some kind of market research, you figure out who are your customers. And you define a small number of these personas that include a name, age, bio, work, set of skills, and a set of goals. Usually a photo too, some kind of stock photo. They're not real people, but when you define a persona, what you're able to do is you're able to think of them as real people. So you never talk about the average user again. So for example, when designing this slide deck, I could ask myself a question like, would the average user want to know about user-centered design? I have no idea. That's a meaningless question. But I could answer the question of whether Jill Anderson wants to know about user-centered design or some very specific persona. And generally for your product, what you want to do is you want to define 1 to 3, very small number of primary personas. And a successful product will meet their goals and do pretty much nothing else. These people must be successful with your product, which means you have to understand their goals, you have to define them, but your product shouldn't do anything else. And that's really the key to simplicity, which is the next user-centered topic. So what is simplicity? Well, we can get a decent idea by looking at physical products. So if you're designing some sort of a physical product, an actual device, there's physical limits. So consider the Swiss Army knife. If you want to add another tool into this knife, then you know you have 2 options. The first option is you can remove one of the existing tools to make space, or you can make the entire knife bigger and therefore more expensive and clunkier to use. And if you keep adding stuff endlessly, eventually you end up with something like that. So that's the opposite of simplicity, right? So when you look at it this way, what simplicity is all about is something that does exactly what those primary personas needs to do and absolutely nothing else. Software is the same way, except instead of physical limits, you have mental limits. The limitation here isn't that you're going to run out of space. The limitation is that the human mind can only handle so much information at a time. And so really good designers make sure that any screen, any part of the product does one thing really well. So you have something like your typical Apple product might look like that. Typical Google product, something like this. And a typical product that you make at your own company looks something like that. That's not simple, right? That's what simplicity is about. What is the one thing my personas have as goals that I need to help them achieve? That's what simplicity is. Or put it another way, perfection is attained not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing more to remove. Next, emotional design. Let's talk about emotions. There's been a bunch of research, and it turns out people interact with their computers, with their devices, just like they would with another human being. They get angry at them, they get sad at them. Every piece of software makes you feel something, whether you want it to or not. And I'm sure you've all experienced this when Microsoft Word has crashed or your printer has jammed right when you need it to print that freaking report. So you have to recognize it. You have to recognize that people don't treat it like an object, they treat it like another person. And if you want to design good software, you need to design software that behaves like a good person. So let me give you some examples. A good person would be considerate and responsive. So here's some examples in software design. The iPhone. As soon as you bring the iPhone to your ear, the ambient light sensor detects it and shuts off the screen. And that way, you don't mash the buttons with your cheek. Amazon. If you buy a camera on Amazon.com, they remember that. Later on, if you're searching for a lens, they automatically show you if that lens is or isn't compatible with your camera. That's what a considerate person would do. Google Hangouts. If you start typing while you're in the middle of a Google Hangout, it mutes your microphone automatically so you don't annoy all the other users. Another thing a good person would be is forgiving. One of the things you learn really quickly from design is that people make mistakes all the time. We type the wrong thing, we click the wrong thing, we misunderstand your design. And if I'm having a conversation with a person, that's not a big deal. That person will ask for clarification, I'll provide more info, we move along. Software tends to be very rigid, and it talks about error messages, and it's very unforgiving, it's very unfriendly. Good design would act like a good human being and ask for clarification, ask for more info. For example, Google, if you make a typo in your search, will ask you, did you mean? That's how you spell my name, by the way. Just wanted to make sure you guys got it right. Twitter's sign-up form. This is actually a pretty good exercise in a sign-up form that doesn't feel like you're talking to a robot, but like a person who's asking you for more information. So instead of just telling you invalid password, it tells you what they're looking for. So for example, your password must be at least 6 characters. And it shows it to you while you're typing. It doesn't wait for you to hit submit and then reload the whole page and annoy you that way. They do a lot of other really good things. I really recommend playing with their sign-up form. It's extremely well built. Stack Overflow, when you type in a new question, it does a search for you and finds similar questions and displays them in line so you don't ask a duplicate question. You have to be forgiving. You have to expect people to make mistakes and make sure your design handles it. Be funny. Have a sense of humor. This never hurts. IMDb, I don't know how many of you guys have seen this. The rating for the movie This Is Spinal Tap goes up to 11. I don't know if you guys can see that, but their 404 page has movie quotes and usually adapted in fun ways, so you can sit here and refresh this page all day. Google, if you search for recursion, asks you, did you mean recursion? Google, if you search for Google in 1998, shows you Google in 1998. The Louis C.K. website, this is a great one. If you reset your password on the Louis C.K. website, you get an email that really sounds like Louis C.K. is just making fun of you. It says, apparently you forgot your password. Okay, here's your new one, stupid. Oh, and here's the login page in case you forgot that too. This is awesome. Like, have a personality, right? Most importantly, be yourself. Figure out who you want your software to be. Who, not what, who. It's going to be treated like a person. And give it a personality. Virgin is really good. All of their brands have really strong personalities. They created a flight safety video. And instead of doing the typical boring one, they did a music video. And it has 11 million views on YouTube. 11 million people willingly watched a flight safety video. That's pretty awesome. Amazon, while you go shopping on Amazon, you can play Christmas songs during the Christmas season for free as you shop. MailChimp has Freddy, the chimp, as their mascot, and he appears in all sorts of hilarious places. It gives the software personality, and that's incredibly important because your product has a voice and it talks to your customers 24 hours a day. So make sure it's a good person. Okay, final aspect of user-centered design is usability testing. This is how you verify that you're actually doing a good job. What you do is you bring in a bunch of outsiders, maybe offer them some incentive, like some amount of money or a t-shirt, and you record them as they try to use your product. And then later on, you come back and you watch that recording. And you'll be blown away by what you learn from this. All of your brilliant designs, all of these schemes, all these great ideas you have fall out the window when the user doesn't even know what your app is about, when they can't even get started, right? You'll learn more, I guarantee it, from a single usability test of your product than listening to me. Do it often. This is one of the most powerful tools you have. It's really easy to do. There's a great book called Don't Make Me Think, which has a really great guide to doing your own usability test. You don't need a lab. You don't need anything fancy. An iPhone on a tripod will do the trick. One of the things I'll point to a few times in this presentation, on the hellostartup.net website, there's a list of startup resources, including a bunch of design tools. And so there's a list of usability testing tools that could be handy for you guys. Okay, so that's user-centered design. Now we'll continue this crash course, this whirlwind tour, by jumping into visual design. And this is more of what a product looks like, feels like, etc. And as we go through this section, I'm going to improve the visual design of 2 specific examples, most of which I think most of you are familiar with them. One is a resume. I don't know how visible that is from back there, but this is basically an ugly design of a resume that I've seen from many, many, usually developers that send in resumes. So we're going to make that look a lot better. And then the second one is just a website. And this is the Hello Startup website, and I basically just removed the styling from it. So we're going to make those look a little nicer. And to do that, we're going to use 4 general tools. And the first one is design reuse. So Steve Jobs said that good artists copy and great artists steal. If you're a developer, you hopefully know this. You probably use tons of open source libraries. You probably make your own code reusable. You do everything you can to avoid reinventing the wheel. Well, it's the same with design. Design is problem solving, and there's a lot of designers out there who have solved a lot of problems and made their work available. Use it. Don't start from scratch. Do not reinvent the wheel. On the Hello Startup website, one of the sections in the design resources lists all sorts of website templates, mobile templates, email templates that look great, work on a variety of devices. There's no need to do those completely from scratch. There's also a list of wireframing and mockup tools if you want to experiment quickly without writing code. There's a list of stock photography, clip art, and icons, so you don't have to create those from scratch. Reuse as much as you can. This is really the secret to being an efficient, fast designer, especially in a startup environment, is use what's out there. Don't start from scratch. And the final designs that I'll show you of that resume and that website, I based them off a couple templates I found online. So reuse as much as you can. Layout. The basic intuition behind layout is you want to put items on a page so that their position communicates information. So one way you can do that is using proximity. The idea here is items that are related should be closer together, and items that are unrelated should be further apart. And your mind will pick up on this automatically. So if we look at the resume, this is the original resume on the left. I hope you guys can see this. On the right is going to be the exact same resume, but with slightly better use of proximity. Can anybody actually see that, or is that too small? See it okay? Basically, all I did is I took individual sections in here, and I moved them further apart, but the content within a section I moved closer together. And what that does is, just by glancing at it, now you can tell where each section starts and where each one ends. It still looks like crap, but we'll get to that. The next step is alignment. And the idea here is you want to position things along strong lines. And again, this is a little easier to see with an example. So there's our resume on the left, and what we're going to do is, by the way, if you notice this resume, its alignment is all over the place. Some things are left aligned. Some parts are center aligned. Some things are right aligned. Everything is just all over the place. You can dramatically improve your designs by picking one line and sticking to it. So here's the exact same content, exact same text, but with a much stronger use of alignment. Now, there's no actual line in this design, but your mind inserts one, which you may unfortunately not be able to see. But there's an imaginary line that goes down here. And just by moving everything towards that one line, there's structure. Your eye can scan down the page. That proximity the proximity changes we did earlier are now much more visible. You can see where everything starts and ends. I don't have to explain it in text. It's just the alignment, the layout, the proximity gives you a lot of information. And here's the same thing for the Hello Startup website. Looks like, imagine there's a border around here. For some reason, the colors have completely blown out the border. It's supposed to be a book. Again, with better use of alignment and proximity, so you can see where one thing starts and another ends. And so the basic message is nothing on a page should be, nothing should be placed on the page arbitrarily. Every element should have some visual connection with another element. This comes from this awesome book, the Non-Designer's Design Book. Grab a copy if you're a newbie to design. Great learning resource. Typography. So once you've kind of positioned things on a page, now you got to determine what the actual text looks like. And most designs, if you think about it, they're not really, again, about colors or buttons or lines. They're text. That's what people do. So there's a bunch of aspects to typography. I'm just going to go through a few. One is measure. That's how long each line of text is. And you can really identify a newbie designer because their lines of text are going to be really wide. You have to scan all the way across the page and all the way back just to read it. That's too much. If you do too little, also hard to read. If you get it right, you get a very nice, readable thing. This is what most newspapers and books look like. And so the rule of thumb to get that is you want about 45 to 90 characters per line. It's a simple change. Once you've memorized this, you will never screw it up again, and it'll make a huge difference in your designs. Leading is the vertical space between lines. Same thing here. Too little, text bleeds together, it's hard to read. Too much, you waste a lot of vertical space, it's hard to read. Get it right, you get a really nice reading experience. Rule of thumb here, 120 to 145% of font size. Remember this, start using it. You'll start using it in your resumes, in your PowerPoints, in your websites, everything. It just will make them look better. And note that what this implies is that the bigger the font, the more leading you need, the more space between lines. Typeface is the design of the letters. So there's a whole bunch of them, Times New Roman and Arial and all of these things that you're probably familiar with. And the best thing you can do here, stop using the ones that are built in. Stop using Arial, stop using Times New Roman. They're overused. They appear in every design, and they just don't look that great anymore. On the Hello Startup website, there's a bunch of resources for fonts you can use. Google Fonts is an amazing resource. There's hundreds of completely free, really high-quality fonts available. But there's also paid ones, Adobe Typekit, and a bunch of others. So check those out. Start using them in your designs. They're just going to look better. A font, actually, by the way, is a typeface with a specific style. So as an example, all of these are exactly the same typeface. This is all Helvetica New. The only difference is the styling. This one is regular and a huge size, bold. This is a small font, italics, caps lock, etc. So when you're designing something, don't pick fonts at random. Don't just sprinkle this font here and this font there. Each font serves a specific purpose on the page. Why? So it can communicate something to the viewer. So in the original resume, it's the same font all throughout, which is not communicating anything. On the right, exact same resume, but now we're using different fonts for different things. So all the job titles now are bold. All the section headings are uppercase, thin letters. And you just use that throughout the design, and now just the style, the typography is communicating information to the reader. It's not arbitrary. It's not about pretty. It's about communication. That said, certain font combinations do look prettier than others. And figuring out which ones work well together, it takes a lot of practice. So save yourself a lot of time and let the professionals handle it. There's a list of font pairing resources. You can also just Google font pairing. And you'll get things that, for example, this is Aesop's Fables, shows you how to pair Google fonts together in really nice, pleasing ways. You don't have to come up with it. Don't reinvent the wheel. Let other people handle it for you. Final design tool I'll talk about is contrast. So there's a lot of things you can do with contrast, but the main one is if you want something to stand out. So for example, in the resume, you can see my name up here, and it's a little different than these, but it doesn't stand out that much. I want it to be more visible because I have a massive ego. And the thing to realize about contrast is you can't make something just a little bit different. People don't notice that. You can't just increase the font size by 2. You have to make it hugely, dramatically, enormously different for people to notice. So for example, on the right, same resume, very different font size, style, etc. for the heading. And this is really important in a product, in a website, in a mobile app, where you want to draw someone's attention to some specific action, a call to action. And so this is the Hello Startup website we have so far, and if I asked you what's the main action I want you to take here, yes, but it's hard to see. Down here, there's this little dinky link that's almost impossible to spot. We can make it, and of course you can't see that. Awesome, all right. This is a big outlined button that's like half the size of the page, but the colors are not there. It's okay, we're actually gonna fix this. So this is a slightly better call to action. We're gonna make it better in just a second. And the way you can make it even more noticeable is to use color. Now, color is even harder to use. Figuring out how to use colors takes a tremendous amount of practice. You need to understand color theory and a whole bunch of other stuff. There's 2 tips that will save you an enormous amount of time with colors. First, do your entire design in black and white. Figure out the layout, the typeface, etc. And when everything looks fine, then add color at the end, usually as a highlight. So we did the whole design of this Hello Startup website in black and white, and then I got the cover image for the book from my publisher, and I used the colors in it just to highlight some things. So here's the same thing, but now with a couple colors tossed in. It's most of which you can see, including, finally, the call to action, which is nice and green and pretty much impossible to miss. But I did the whole design in black and white before I thought about color. Second thing for colors is, again, let the professionals figure it out. There's a list of awesome websites that show what are nice, pleasing, and effective color palettes, using color theory, using the color palette from other websites. So grab those, start using them, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time. And if you screw up color, it can look awful. So use these. OK, quick recap of this whirlwind tour. User-centered design means before you start drawing in pictures and buttons, figure out who your users are and why they're using your product. And you do that using personas instead of the average user. Simplicity, in other words, what's the one thing my product has to do? Design your product to be a good human being. Do a lot of usability testing. And then the visual design topics. We started with kind of a bleh resume. We improved a little bit by improving the layout to communicate information by the position of elements. We then improved the typography, so the different fonts we used communicate more information. And then we added some contrast so certain things stand out a lot more. Same thing on the website. We started with just plain old HTML. We improved the layout. We improved the typography. And then at the end, we added some colors, so it's something usable and has a nice contrast so you know what to do. And finally, at the root of it all was a whole lot of design reuse. I reused templates, I reused images, I reused fonts, I reused color combinations that somebody else had already done. And that's really the core, especially in a startup environment, to getting things done quickly. So if you want more info, check out my book. I go through a whole bunch of other topics like coming up with ideas, validating, market research, MVPs, distribution, marketing, et cetera. So other aspects of product development. And if you need
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Jim? Questions?
I will throw this one towards you.
Yeah, we have a very cool microphone for questions.
Do you have your own definition?
Speak in.
Do you have your own definition for design?
Do I have my own definition for design?
Because there are so many definitions what design really is and what it covers. So maybe you have your own definition for it.
Sure, building things. Solving problems, communicating information. That's basically design, in my view. Other questions?
Other questions? No? Really?
So you recommended to use personas, but isn't using some 3 personas just making 3 average users? So
That's a good question. So is using 3 personas 3 average users? No, personas are very specific users. They're not average. You go out and you find out who are the people that use your products, very specifically. And even more importantly,
do you use 3 real persons? Or
No. They're always fictional, but they represent your actual target market. And they're specific. Like, they have backstories, they have photographs, they have names. And literally, designers will sit there and talk about whether Jill and Bob and Steve would want or not want certain features, or be able to or not be able to use certain features. Because Jill and Bob are people, right? You can reason over whether Jill would know how to use some aspect of your software based on her background. Whereas would an average user know how to use some feature? I don't know. What's your definition of average, right? What's mine? We don't know. We don't agree on it. But when we write it down for a persona, then as a team, we agree on exactly what we mean. And you may have to change your personas. You may get them wrong the first time, or they may change as your product changes. But the point is, you're focused on some very specific representative, not real, but representative individuals.
Okay, someone else?
No more questions?
Oh, there's one more over there.
Okay. Gonna try.
Now what do you want to put information? For example, what's your opinion if I have startup idea, I have product which will be my website or service which I will provide, but I don't know to whom I should market it. Should I market it to utility providers, or should I make it for for owners of real estate, or should I go to tenants who is using this property? So how to decide to who market solution? What's your opinion? Thank you.
That's a good question, who to market to. So there's certainly no short answer I can give you in a minute, but I'll give you kind of my thought process, which is I actually build products in the opposite direction. I don't build a product and build a design and come up with an idea and then try to sell it to someone. I come up with an idea, or really I identify a problem, and then I find someone to sell it to. And only when I have someone who I know is going to buy it, do I build a product. And then it's obvious who to market to. I don't build a product until there's somebody ready to buy it. That doesn't work in 100% of markets, but it works in an awful lot of places. You can call it validation, you can call it customer development. There's a great book on it called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. Highly recommend it. And the basic idea is, you don't want to have a solution in search of a problem. You don't want to build the next Google Wave or the next Segway or, hey, look at this cool technology, who can I market it to? You want to go and find those customers before you build it. And then the marketing thing kind of solves itself.
Any more questions?
I think I got one.
All right. How do you actually target your specific designs, specifics of your design when your actual customers are both parents and their kids? Who would you actually target?
I think I need to know a little more about that example to really answer it, in terms of what product you're building, and maybe we should chat afterwards. I think in general, the answer is obviously going to be it depends. If you have multiple users for your product, then either you sort of average out the interface so that they can all use the same one, or you create separate interfaces for the separate users. And which one you go with really, really depends on the product. So we should chat afterwards.
Sure, thank you.
Do you think that there is a good alternative for user-centered design, and what is it? Because if there isn't, maybe we could call just a regular way of design.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you think that there is a good alternative for user-centered design?
A good alternative for user-centered design? Yeah, you failed. I mean, basically, if you're not paying attention to who is using your products, that's what user-centered design. It's a fancy buzzword, but at the end of the day, all we're really saying is pay attention to the people using the software and not features, not buttons, not colors. And I cannot imagine a way to build software for people without thinking about people. So no, I don't. I can't think of a better alternative other than maybe a better buzzword, and I'm totally open to different names for this concept.
Okay, I think that was the last question, so thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.